Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Man in the Wall. I talk about history, politics, and whatever else I feel like that day. And today, I'd like to talk to you about a bearded Ohioan by the name of Maupin. For the unfamiliar, Maupin is a political commentator and YouTuber who appears frequently on state-owned Russian media platform RT. Maupin, like a lot of people who I'm going to talk about on this show, is a tanky, a nickname originating from the Soviet invasion of Hungary to indicate those who uncritically support authoritarian, so-called socialist states such as the Soviet Union, People's Republic of China, etc. Most of you probably know him from his debate with popular YouTube socialist streamer Vash. It was a pretty good showing, largely because Vash absolutely obliterated Maupin and called him out in his authoritarian apologia and genocide denial. But hey, why should he have all the fun? I mean, surely we could have more than one of us calling these morons out for their bad takes, which is what I intend to do. Specifically today, I want to look at one particular video of Maupin's from a few months ago. Quote, "If Americans understood the Berlin Wall, they would be angry." So, yeah, let's take a look.
Hey folks, so we've all heard about the Berlin Wall. We all know how the Berlin Wall is discussed in American media and American discourse. The idea is that the Berlin Wall was this big, huge wall in order to cage people in East Germany because socialism and communism are so evil that everyone wants to escape and everyone wants to get out. And they had to build a big, huge wall in order to keep people in, and that's why America is the greatest country in the world, and Western capitalism is the best system ever, and if you don't think that, you're crazy and brainwashed.
Right off the bat, I love how he immediately poisons the well of conversation. He acts as if you disagree with him on the subject of the Berlin Wall, you must be some rabid, ultra-capitalist American exceptionalist. Never mind the fact that the right to freedom movement is something that's enshrined in the 1948 UN Human Rights Commission, or that one of the most adamant opponents of the wall was West Berlin Mayor and later German Chancellor Willy Brandt, who oversaw a series of major social democratic reforms in the country. No, only right-wingers oppose the Berlin Wall. What are you talking about?
Folks, we need to understand what brain drain is, right? In the United States, if you go to the doctor, you go to a company that has engineers, very skilled people, often you'll notice that those people are not from the United States. Those people are from India or Russia or China or many countries around the world. And why is that? The United States has a policy of working very, very hard to import doctors, engineers, technicians, scientists. This has been a long-standing aspect of the U.S. economy. We bring skilled people from developing countries to the United States. And of course, we were doing this during the Cold War. In fact, this policy really got going during the Cold War. And it was very, very effective because it was a way to drain these socialist countries of Eastern Europe, East Germany, Romania, Czechoslovakia, the Soviet Union, China. It was a way to drain them of the intellectual capital they needed. In order to build up their countries, they needed engineers, they needed doctors, they needed scientists. So the United States went out of its way to start recruiting those people from socialist countries, offering them very, very large salaries, giving them, guaranteed visas, doing everything they could to strip the socialist countries of their intellectuals. Most people living in East Germany did not want to leave. Most people living in East Germany, factory workers, for example, teachers, people in communities, they were happy with the job security. The people who wanted to leave were the skilled folks who were being courted by Western capitalism. And the Berlin Wall was erected as a mechanism for keeping those folks from leaving.
Well, there's quite a bit to unpack here. First of all, brain drain to the United States has existed since the Gilded Age, when many Jews left Europe because of rabid anti-Semitism. Second, the idea that the mass exodus of East Germans was all because of some American plot to undermine East Germany simply isn't true. Namely because most East Germans weren't coming to America. In reality, the vast majority of East Germans were moving to West Germany. For both economic reasons, West Germany had a higher GDP all throughout the Cold War, as well as political reasons, namely the fact that these emigrants didn't like living in a Soviet vassal state. Of course, Maupin ignores this because, for one, it would require him to acknowledge the fact that West Germany was a more economically prosperous nation than East Germany, and secondly, because it undermines the notion that he is pushing of some American capitalist plot to undermine the Eastern Bloc being the main reason for brain drain. He can't imagine that these people simply migrate voluntarily to better their lives. Third, while it is true that many of the people who left were young, educated professionals, they certainly didn't represent the only people leaving. Many farmers, for example, left East Germany due to collectivization. Altogether, 3.5 million people, roughly 20% of the entire East German population, would leave between the end of the Second World War and the construction of the Berlin Wall, which I imagine included quite a few factory workers and teachers. But putting all that aside, yes, it is true that a large number of the people leaving East Germany were high-skilled professionals. But my response to that is, why then would the solution not be for the East German government to improve the material and economic conditions of their country in order to make sure those high-skilled workers didn't leave, but rather to build a wall down the streets of Berlin to prevent defection, fundamentally violating the human right to freedom of movement, as laid out in the 1948 UN Human Rights Declaration. A wall guarded by police officers who were ordered by their government to, quote-unquote, not hesitate to use your firearm when people attempted to cross, even when, quote-unquote, the border is being breached by women and children, which is a tactic traitors have used. A wall at which 139 people died attempting to get into West Berlin. A wall that caused an enormous number of family separations. But even putting all that aside, given the fact that Maupin has appeared on state television for regimes which murder gay people, I take it human rights aren't really a priority for him, the wall utterly failed to fix the problems which created it. The East German economy continued to lag behind the West, and GDP growth stagnated during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. To this day, East Germany is less developed than West Germany, even despite $2 trillion in aid having been sent to the East following reunification. On top of that, the wall was terrific PR for the West. I mean, why do you think 2 American presidents made speeches in front of it? I mean, to quote one of those presidents directly,
freedom has many difficulties, and democracy is not perfect. But we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in.
And what more, right? This brain drain effort has not just been bad for people in countries around the world, and it still continues. It's not just socialist countries. They do it to countries like India, countries like Nigeria, countries like, all kinds of countries. Modern Russia has a big problem with brain drain. And they do it, and not only is it bad for countries in the developing world because they're stripped of their highly skilled and high-performing people, often people that they educate at the national expense. These governments spend lots of money to educate engineers and scientists and doctors, and then the United States, pulls them out. But on top of that, it's bad for us here in the United States. Folks, our education system in the United States sucks. Let's be real. Our education system in the United States is an epic disaster. Americans cannot find their own country on a map. Our math and science scores in the United States are horrendous compared to other countries. And you know why that is? Well, it's okay. We don't need engineers and scientists in the United States. We can import them from India. We can import them from Czechoslovakia. We can import them from Russia. We can import them from China.
Again, the narrative that Maupin is pushing simply isn't true. The main reason that the American education system is falling behind is because teachers make comparatively less money as opposed to countries with better education systems, meaning that since there are now options for better paying jobs that there weren't previously, there's less incentive for people to enter the profession. Another big problem is income inequality, as lower income students are more likely to drop out of high school, and 23 out of 50 states in America spend more money for schools in affluent districts as opposed to impoverished ones. The trope that Maupin is using, ignoring these systemic factors as a means of blaming immigrants, is something that plenty of right-wing politicians have done in the past. A prime example of that is Donald Trump, who stated in regards to immigrants from the HP-1 visa workers program, which mostly included the kind of high-skilled workers Maupin is describing as being quote-unquote imported from abroad for the explicit purpose of substituting for American workers at lower pay. But again, this simply isn't true. In fact, a study from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University found, for the most part, HP-1 visa workers were mostly hired to fulfill jobs that American workers didn't want to do based on factors such as location, the size of the business, or lack of prestige, or so they could do certain highly specialized work. On top of that, no evidence was found to suggest that these workers hurt wages, so by and large, you can't really say they were hiring HP-1 visa workers to save money. So if you want to fix the education system in America, you should probably focus on advocating for higher payment for teachers and policies that lessen the income disparity in regards to education. And yes, brain drain does hurt the countries from which these people live, but the response to that should be for the government and businesses to take steps to materially improve the economic conditions of said country, not to restrict freedom of movement. Also, maybe this is minor, but notice his rhetoric. These people are pulled out by the United States. He acts as if high-skilled immigrants who leave their native country for America are somehow being illegitimately taken away. Like these people are just toys of whatever state they come from that America stole. Which is fitting because the Eastern Bloc governments made the exact same argument, essentially saying that these high-skilled workers had to stay in these states because of the job training and education they received there, which they didn't. No state has the right to infringe on one's freedom of movement, and the notion that these people were somehow indebted to the state is authoritarian at best and fascistic at worst. Of course, this is fitting of Maupin, who's a blatant authoritarian.
And when you equate China, and you equate China with authoritarianism, I think you're doing yourself a little bit of a disservice, because right now, many people across the United States are suffering. They are not having jobs. They are unemployed. There's opioid addiction. There's a prison industrial complex. And what they want, they don't want some hippy-dippy worker co-op in the woods. They want a government of action. They want state power. They want authoritarianism on behalf of the people.
And that's what the Berlin Wall was really about. I'm not saying it was the right thing to do. I don't know what I would have done if I were the leader of East Germany. I don't know if I would have built the Berlin Wall or the anti-fascist protection wall like they did. I'm not saying it was necessarily the right thing to do. But what I'm telling you is that what it was built in response to is something that has hurt us Americans.
This is a slight deviation away from the main subject of the rest of the video, but I think it's worth bringing up anyway, mostly because it strikes at the heart of a common tactic that not just tankies, but plenty of extremist and reactionary figures will use. You see, when you advocate for reactionary viewpoints like, say, denying the Uyghur cultural genocide or apologizing for the Berlin Wall, it's very difficult to say these things directly out in the open. Much like how for many in the alt-right, it's difficult for them to come out in the open and say they're in favor of a white ethno-state. So what you do is you engage in rhetoric and apologia that essentially lead you to those conclusions, but when someone presses you on it, you can just say, I'm not defending/advocating for X, I'm just challenging conventional perspectives. Oh, I'm not racist, I just believe in a conspiracy by some unnamed all-powerful group of elites to outbred white people by importing immigrants that has literally been used to justify white supremacist terrorist attacks. Oh, I'm not saying that the Berlin Wall was a justified response to brain drain, I'm just making apologia for it and hosting people on my blog spot who said that a wall that hundreds of people died trying to cross was comparable to union picketing that, quote-unquote, was built in defense of the workers and the oppressed. Most tankies do this in some form or another, but Maupin, being a professional propagandist and a grifter who spouts authoritarian apologist nonsense because RT pays him to, is better at it than most. I'm Man in the Wall, and I'll see you